What if I asked you one simple but terrifying question? Would you still marry the person you love if you knew there was a curse that could kill you if they weren't actually your soulmate? Because that's exactly the idea that this entire series is built around. And honestly, it's what makes this story feel so disturbing and thought-provoking at the same time, because it forces you to question love, trust, and whether we truly know the person we're choosing to spend our lives with. And throughout this 8-episode series, we followed Rachel as she went to extreme lengths to make sure that the person she was about to marry was actually her soulmate. Because if not, she would die, just like her mother and every other person in her bloodline who fell victim to this curse that all traces back to Marion. And what makes this even more intense is the fact that Rachel wasn't just dealing with fear, she was dealing with doubt, because the deeper she went into understanding the curse, the more uncertain she became about her relationship with Nikki. And with that being said, let's dive into the series, break everything down, and answer all the major questions that were left unanswered. Here is Something Very Bad is Going to Happen, Ending Explained, and Review. And just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. So, starting with the ending itself and the biggest question of them all, why did Rachel survive? Because this is where everything changes, and
the truth about the curse really comes to light, because at first it seemed like the curse was simple. If you marry someone who isn't your soulmate, you die. But the finale completely flipped that idea on its head, because what we saw was Nikki deciding to go ahead with the marriage even after Rachel said she didn't want to continue. And that moment alone confirmed that they were not soulmates, because they were no longer on the same page. They didn't trust each other, and they didn't believe in the same reality. And almost immediately after that, the consequences began, with Rachel's nose starting to bleed just like everyone else who had been affected by the curse before. And when she stepped outside and died, it was one of the most emotional and tragic moments in the entire series, because she was completely alone in that moment. And what made it even more heartbreaking was the fact that Nikki still didn't truly believe her until it was too late, because throughout the entire series, he chose to trust his family over the person he claimed to love. And that decision ultimately cost him everything. And as the chaos at the wedding unfolded, we began to see the truth behind all the other relationships as well, because Victoria's death revealed that she was never truly in love with her husband, but instead with Beta, the person she didn't choose all those years ago. And Portia's death made it clear that her marriage was never real to begin,
because it was based on something random and meaningless. And all of these moments together highlighted one key idea: that marriage without true connection, without being soulmates, is essentially empty, and in this world, it's deadly. But the biggest twist of all came with the reveal of how the curse actually works, because it's not just about dying, it's about balance. And when Nikki backed out in the way that he did, it meant that the curse shifted from Rachel's bloodline to his, and with that shift came a consequence, because someone had to carry the burden of immortality, just like the witness did 200 years ago. And that's where everything comes full circle, because Rachel didn't just survive by chance, she survived because she became the new witness, the one who now has to live on and watch the curse continue, which completely changes the meaning of her survival, because instead of it being a happy ending, it's actually a tragic one, as she's now tied to the curse in a completely different way. And that final moment where she throws the ring away while the song plays in the background perfectly symbolizes the truth about her relationship with Nikki, that they were never truly in love, not in the way that mattered, not in the way that could have saved them. And that realization is what makes the ending hit so hard.
And when you really think about it, that ending isn't just about a curse or survival. It's actually about something much deeper, because the entire series is built around the idea of what love truly means and whether we actually understand it the way we think we do. Because throughout the story, Rachel believed that love was something that could be proven, something that could be tested and confirmed. But the more she tried to prove it, the more it started to fall apart. And that's where the deeper theme of the series really begins to show itself. Because this isn't just a horror story, it's a story about perception, about how we view relationships, and how our understanding of love is often shaped by what we've seen growing up. Because when you look at Nikki, his entire idea of love came from his parents, a relationship that we later find out was completely broken and built on lies. And because of that, his understanding of what a real connection looks like was flawed from the very beginning, which is why he could never fully understand what Rachel
Rachel was going through. And on the other side, Rachel was driven by fear. Fear of ending up like her mother, fear of the curse, and fear of being wrong about the person she loved. And that fear slowly turned into doubt, and that doubt is what ultimately destroyed their relationship. Because in a situation like this, belief is everything. And the moment that belief is gone, everything else collapses with it. And I think that's why the show did such a good job at making us question whether
they were ever truly soulmates to begin with, because real soulmates wouldn't need to prove it. They would simply know. And one of the most powerful examples of this comes from Jules and Nellie, because on the surface, they seemed like the least likely couple to survive. They were going through a divorce, they didn't appear to be in love in the traditional sense, and yet they were the ones who made it through. And that completely flips the expectations of the audience, because it shows that love isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it exists in the quiet moments, in the understanding between two people, in the way they work together as a team. And that's something Rachel even pointed out herself, and it's what makes their survival feel so meaningful, because it proves that being soulmates isn't about perfection, it's about connection, and that's something that Nikki and Rachel never truly had, not in the way that mattered. And when you look at the scene with Jude, hiding under the table and witnessing everything unfold, it mirrors what Jules experienced in his own childhood, and it suggests that history might repeat itself. But this time there's a difference, because Rachel warned him. She told him to remember everything, to learn from it, and that warning could be the very thing that changes his future and stops the cycle from continuing in the same way. And that brings us to the overall review of the series, because as a whole, this show does a lot of things really well. The concept itself is incredibly unique and original, something that
It immediately grabs your attention and keeps you invested, and the stakes are always high because the consequences are so extreme. But at the same time, it's not perfect because there are moments where the pacing feels a bit slow, especially in the earlier episodes where it takes time to fully reveal what's actually going on, and it might have worked better as a slightly shorter series. But even with that, the atmosphere, the tension, and the overall storytelling make it worth watching because the way it blends horror with emotional drama creates something that feels different from most shows in this genre. And the visual style also plays a big part in that, from the long, continuous shots to the close-ups that capture every emotion to the eerie presence of death moving through the scenes. It all adds to the unsettling feeling that something is always wrong, and even the decision to include elements like the VHS-style episode or the misdirection in the beginning where the family seemed like part of a cult, it all contributes to making the story more engaging and unpredictable. And in terms of performances, Rachel's character really stands out because the emotional range that we see from fear to vulnerability to realization is what carries the story forward. And Nikki's character, while frustrating at times, is also realistic in the sense that not everyone is
capable of facing the truth, especially when it challenges everything they've ever believed in. And by the time the series comes to an end, what you're left with isn't just answers about the curse, but questions about love, about trust, and about whether we truly know the people we choose to be with. And that's what makes this story stick with you even after it's over. Because it's not just about what happened, it's about what it means, and whether in a situation like this, any of us would actually make the right choice. So overall, I'd say this series is definitely worth watching. It's not perfect, but it's unique, it's emotional, and it tells a story that makes you think. And sometimes that's more important than anything else. So there you have it, the full breakdown, ending explained, and review of Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen. Let me know what you think about the ending. Do you believe Rachel and Nikki were ever soulmates, or was it doomed from the start? And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.